Hello and welcome back. In our previous video, we examined the documented public record connecting Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. We looked at their social history, reviewed the newly released documents, explored social media narratives, and surveyed public opinion polling. We presented the facts as they stand in official records and emphasized the difference between allegations and proof. That analysis was intentionally cautious, focusing on what we can verify versus what remains speculation. Today, we are going deeper. This video takes a more direct approach. We will ask the difficult questions that many people have raised, but which are often avoided in mainstream analysis. We will examine the contradictions in official statements, explore the gaps in the public record, and consider what the absence of certain evidence might mean. We will look at the timeline of events with a critical eye, analyze the specific content of Epstein's emails about Trump in detail, and consider why certain aspects of this story remain unresolved despite intense public interest. This is not about making accusations or defending anyone. This is about transparency. We will present the uncomfortable questions, the paradoxes in the available information, and the patterns that emerge when you look closely at the documented facts. Throughout this video, we will distinguish between what we know for certain, what we can reasonably infer, and what remains pure speculation. We will also examine how power, wealth, and political influence shape investigations and public narratives in cases like this. Our goal is to help you think critically about this topic. We will provide context that is often missing from viral social media segments and cable news segments. By the end of this video, you will have a clearer understanding of what the Epstein files actually reveal about Trump, what they do not reveal, and why this case remains so controversial and unresolved. Let us begin with the most fundamental question that rarely gets asked directly. The first question we need to address is one of timeline and credibility. Donald Trump's public statements about Jeffrey Epstein have shifted significantly over the years, and understanding these shifts is crucial to evaluating his overall narrative. In 2002, Trump gave an interview to New York Magazine where he described Epstein in glowing terms. He said, and this is a direct quote, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." This statement is important for several reasons. First, it establishes that Trump and Epstein had known each other for at least 15 years by 2002, meaning their relationship dates back to at least 1987. Second, Trump describes Epstein as a terrific guy and someone who's a lot of fun to be with, which indicates a positive social relationship. Third, and most noticeably, Trump specifically mentions that Epstein likes women on the younger side. This comment has been analyzed extensively. Some argue it was an innocent observation about Epstein preferring younger adult women, which was common knowledge in their social circles. Others point out that this phrasing, especially in retrospect, seems remarkably prescient given what we now know about Epstein's crimes involving underage girls. Now, contrast that 2002 statement with what Trump said years later, after Epstein's arrest and conviction. Trump has repeatedly claimed that he had a falling out with Epstein around 2004 and that he banned Epstein from his Mar-a-Lago resort. In interviews conducted in 2019 and later, Trump characterized Epstein as a sick guy and insisted he was not a fan. He told reporters that the reason for the falling out was that Epstein had been recruiting or approaching employees from Mar-a-Lago, specifically women working at the club's spa, and Trump objected to this behavior. Trump said he told Epstein repeatedly to stop taking his employees and eventually kicked him out of the club permanently. Here is where the questions begin to emerge.
If Trump truly knew as early as 2002 that Epstein liked women on the younger side, and if he later discovered that Epstein was recruiting his employees in ways he found inappropriate, what exactly did Trump think was happening? The claim is that Trump objected to Epstein taking his workers, but was the objection purely about losing employees, or was it about what Epstein might be doing with those employees? Trump has said he thought Epstein's behavior was wrong, but he has not provided details about what specifically he witnessed or was told. Did he suspect illegal activity? If so, did he report it to anyone? If not, why characterize it as serious enough to warrant banning Epstein from the club? Another timeline question involves the public nature of the falling out. If Trump truly broke ties with Epstein in 2004, why was this not mentioned publicly until after Epstein's crimes became widely known? There are no news reports from 2004 or 2005 documenting any public dispute between Trump and Epstein. In fact, it appears that Trump only began emphasizing the falling out narrative after Epstein's arrest in 2019 brought renewed media attention to anyone connected to him. This does not necessarily mean Trump is lying about the falling out, but it does raise questions about why such a significant break in their relationship went unmentioned for so many years, only to be highlighted once it became politically and socially advantageous to distance himself from Epstein. We also need to examine Trump's flight records on Epstein's private plane. Flight logs that have been publicly available for years show that Trump flew on Epstein's plane on multiple occasions in the 1990s. The exact number of flights varies depending on the source, with some reports indicating at least 7 flights. Trump has downplayed this, saying he hitched a ride from Florida to New York once or twice because his own plane was unavailable. But the flight logs suggest more frequent travel together than Trump has publicly acknowledged. The question is not whether flying on someone's plane is inherently suspicious. It's not. It's about consistency and transparency. If Trump and Epstein were merely casual acquaintances, as Trump now suggests, why the multiple flights together? And if they were closer than Trump now admits, what does that tell us about the depth of their relationship during the period when Epstein was actively committing crimes? These timeline contradictions do not prove wrongdoing, but they do create a credibility problem. They raise the question of whether Trump's current narrative about his relationship with Epstein is entirely accurate or whether it has been shaped and refined over time to minimize the appearance of closeness. Now, let's turn to the Epstein emails themselves, which are perhaps the most discussed pieces of evidence in the newly released files. These emails are significant because they represent Epstein's own words, written in private correspondence where he had no apparent reason to lie or exaggerate. However, they are also problematic as evidence because they're uncorroborated statements from a convicted sex offender who had every incentive to deflect blame and implicate powerful people to protect himself or gain leverage. The first email we need to examine closely was sent by Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell in 2011. In this email, Epstein wrote, "That dog that hasn't barked is Trump." Then he added, he spent hours at my house with a victim whose name was redacted in the publicly released version. Later disclosures by House Republicans revealed that the redacted name was Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most well-known victims. This email is explosive on its face, but we need to unpack what it actually means and what it does not. First, the phrase, "the dog that hasn't barked," is a reference to a Sherlock Holmes story, where the significant clue is what didn't happen. In this context, Epstein seems to be suggesting that Trump is notable for his silence or inaction regarding Epstein's situation. Was Epstein implying that Trump knew things but was not speaking publicly? Was he suggesting that Trump could be a liability if he chose to speak? The phrasing is ambiguous and open to interpretation. Second, the claim that Trump spent hours at Epstein's house with Virginia Giuffre is presented as fact by Epstein, but we have no independent verification of this. Crucially, Virginia Giuffre herself has publicly stated on multiple occasions that Trump was never involved in her abuse. In a deposition and in media interviews, Giuffre has been clear that while she was trafficked to many powerful men, Trump was not one of them. She has even described Trump as the only person in that social circle who did not make her uncomfortable. So we have Epstein claiming Trump was present and Virginia Giuffre saying Trump was not involved in any inappropriate behavior. How do we reconcile this? One possibility is that Epstein was telling the truth about Trump being present, but exaggerating or implying something nefarious when nothing actually happened. Perhaps Trump did visit Epstein's properties. Perhaps Giuffre was present on one of those occasions, but their interaction was entirely innocent from Trump's perspective. Another possibility is that Epstein was lying or embellishing in his email to make himself seem more connected, or to create leverage by implying he had information about Trump.
We simply do not know. What we do know is that the claim in the email is not supported by the testimony of the alleged victim named in it. The second major email was sent by Epstein in 2019 to author Michael Wolff. In it, Epstein wrote, "Of course he knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop." This is even more direct than the first email. Epstein is claiming that Trump knew about the girls, meaning the young women or underage girls Epstein was trafficking, and that Trump specifically asked Ghislaine Maxwell to stop whatever she was doing. This email, if accurate, would suggest that Trump had direct knowledge of illegal activity and asked for it to stop rather than reporting it to authorities. However, we must again consider the source and context. This email was written in 2019, at a time when Epstein was facing new criminal charges and intense media scrutiny. He was writing to a journalist, someone who might publish or use this information. Was Epstein trying to spread blame, to suggest that other powerful people were complicit, in order to deflect attention from himself or to create negotiating leverage? Was he telling the truth, or was he engaging in reputation management by implication? Trump has denied the claims in this email. When asked about it, he said he knew nothing about that. But here we encounter another problem. Trump has also admitted that he told Epstein to stop taking employees from Mar-a-Lago. If Trump asked Epstein to stop doing something with his employees, does that align with Epstein's claim that Trump asked Ghislaine to stop something related to the girls? Could these be referring to the same incidents, but described differently depending on the speaker's perspective and motive? The fundamental problem with these emails is that they are uncorroborated. They are Epstein's words written in private, and we have no recordings, no witnesses, and no documents to verify them. In a legal setting, these emails would likely be considered hearsay and inadmissible as evidence of Trump's guilt. But in the court of public opinion, they are treated as smoking guns by some and as obvious fabrications by others. The truth is probably more nuanced. Epstein may have been telling partial truths mixed with exaggerations and implications, creating a narrative that served his interests while containing just enough reality to be plausible. This brings us to the paradox of Virginia Giuffre, which is one of the most confusing and important aspects of this entire story. Giuffre is Epstein's most credible and high-profile victim. She has testified extensively about the abuse she suffered and the powerful men she was trafficked to, including Prince Andrew, for whom she provided detailed and consistent accounts that led to a settlement and his withdrawal from public life. Her testimony has been central to multiple investigations and lawsuits. So when Virginia Giuffre says that Donald Trump was not involved in her abuse, that statement carries significant weight. But this creates a puzzle. If Epstein wrote in his email that Trump spent hours at his house with Giuffre, but Giuffre says Trump was never inappropriate with her, what are we to make of this? There are several possible explanations. One is that Epstein was simply lying or exaggerating in his email, perhaps to imply guilt by association where none existed. Another is that Trump was present at social gatherings, where Giuffre was also present, but no abuse occurred during those specific occasions.
A third possibility is that Giuffre, for her own reasons, has chosen not to implicate Trump, even if there was something to implicate. This third option is often raised by Trump's critics, who suggest that Giuffre might be protecting Trump due to legal pressure, fear, or some kind of arrangement. However, this third explanation is problematic for several reasons. Giuffre has shown tremendous courage in coming forward against extremely powerful men, including members of the British royal family. She has faced intense legal battles, public scrutiny, and personal attacks. It seems unlikely that someone willing to take on Prince Andrew would be unwilling to tell the truth about Trump if there were truth to tell. Moreover, Giuffre has been asked about Trump in multiple depositions and interviews over the years, and her answer has remained consistent. Trump was not involved. Lying under oath in a deposition would be perjury, and there's no evidence that Giuffre has perjured herself. So, the most likely explanation, based on the available evidence, is that Epstein's claim in his email was either false, exaggerated, or misleadingly phrased. Perhaps Trump did cross paths with Giuffre at social events, but nothing inappropriate occurred. Perhaps Epstein included Trump's name to add credibility or importance to his correspondence. Or perhaps Epstein genuinely believed, wrongly, that Trump was more involved than he actually was. But here is where it gets even more complicated. There were other victims besides Virginia Giuffre. The Epstein files contain depositions and statements from multiple women who were abused. Have any of them mentioned Trump? The answer is largely no, but not entirely. For example, Johanna Sjoberg, another Epstein victim, testified that she was once taken to Trump's casino in Allen Jackson. However, she made clear that nothing inappropriate happened during that visit. She was there with Epstein. Trump may have been present, but there was no allegation of abuse involving Trump. Her testimony, like Giuffre's, places Trump in proximity to Epstein and his victims, but does not accuse him of any wrongdoing. This pattern repeats throughout the files. Trump's name appears, sometimes in passing, sometimes in more detailed contexts, but never with a credible allegation of direct involvement in abuse. This is important because it distinguishes Trump from other men named in the files, some of whom have been directly accused by multiple victims. But it also leaves open the question of what Trump knew and when he knew it, even if he did not participate. Let us now examine the Mar-a-Lago connection in detail, because this is where some of the most troubling questions arise. Mar-a-Lago is Trump's private club in Palm Beach, Florida, an exclusive resort that attracts wealthy and powerful members. Jeffrey Epstein was also based in Palm Beach, where he owned a mansion just a few miles from Mar-a-Lago. According to multiple sources, including Trump's own statements, Epstein recruited young women from Mar-a-Lago staff during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Trump has admitted that this recruitment happened, and he said it was the reason he eventually banned Epstein from the club. But this admission raises more questions than it answers. First, how many Mar-a-Lago employees were recruited by Epstein? We don't have exact numbers, but multiple women who later became Epstein victims have stated they were working at Mar-a-Lago when they were approached. Second, what exactly did this recruitment entail? Were they offered jobs, invited to parties, or promised modeling opportunities? And third, what was their age at the time? Some of Epstein's victims were underage when they were first recruited, while others were adults. And fourth, and most critically, what did Trump know about what was happening to these women after they left his employ? Trump's narrative is that he noticed Epstein was taking his employees, and he told him to stop. But the timeline here is murky. If this recruitment was happening throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, and Trump didn't ban Epstein until around 2004, why did it take so long? If he suspected something inappropriate, why not act immediately? And if he did not suspect anything inappropriate, what did he think Epstein was doing with these young women?
There is another dimension to this that is often overlooked. Mar-a-Lago, as a private club, had a responsibility to protect its employees. If the club's owner knew or suspected that a member was recruiting employees for potentially exploitative purposes, there would be a duty of care to investigate and potentially report it. There is no public record of Mar-a-Lago or Trump reporting Epstein to law enforcement before Epstein's first arrest in 2006. This does not mean a report was not made, but if it was, it has not been disclosed. The absence of such a report is notable. Some of Epstein's victims have described how they were initially approached at their workplace with offers that seemed legitimate, job opportunities or modeling gigs, and only later realized they were being groomed for abuse. If Mar-a-Lago was a recruiting ground, even unwittingly, and if Trump knew women from his club were ending up in Epstein's orbit, what responsibility did he have to inquire further or to protect his employees? Again, we are not making accusations, we are asking questions that the public record does not clearly answer. The fact that Trump eventually banned Epstein suggests he recognized something was wrong, but the delay and the lack of detailed public explanation leaves room for doubt about how much he knew and when. Let us now address a crucial concept that is often misunderstood in public discussions of the Epstein files: the difference between absence of evidence and evidence of absence. This distinction is fundamental to understanding what we can and cannot conclude from the documents that have been released. Absence of evidence means that we have not found proof of something. In this case, we have not found proof that Donald Trump committed any crime related to Jeffrey Epstein. There is no smoking gun document, no credible witness testimony, no forensic evidence linking Trump to the sexual abuse of minors. This is a fact. But absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Just because we have not found proof of something does not mean it did not happen. It means we do not have the evidence to prove it. And in the case of the Epstein files, we need to acknowledge that the evidentiary record is incomplete. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell, his longtime associate, was convicted and is serving a prison sentence, but she has not publicly cooperated by naming other individuals. Many potential witnesses have not come forward, and crucially, many documents remain sealed or were never created in the first place. Consider what we do not have access to. We do not have the contents of Epstein's safe, which reportedly contained blackmail material including photographs and videos. We do not have the full flight logs for all of Epstein's aircraft. We do not have access to Epstein's personal diaries or calendars. We do not have the complete communications between Epstein and his associates. We do not have testimony from all of his victims, some of whom have chosen to remain anonymous or have not been located by investigators. Why does this matter? Because the public discussion often treats the documents as if they represent the totality of what happened. If Trump's name does not appear in a damning way in the released documents, his supporters claim he is exonerated. But that conclusion is only valid if we assume the released documents contain all relevant information, and we have no reason to assume that. In fact, we have reasons to suspect the opposite. Documents have been released in stages, often heavily redacted. Some materials were destroyed before investigators could seize them. Epstein's death ended any possibility of his cooperation with investigators. The result is that we are working with a partial record, and we must be intellectually honest about what that means. This does not mean we should assume guilt where we have no evidence. Presumption of innocence is a bedrock principle, but it does mean we should be cautious about claims of absolute exoneration based on incomplete information. The truth is, we have enough information to know that Trump and Epstein were connected, enough to know that their relationship ended under circumstances that Trump describes as problematic, and enough to know that Epstein himself made claims about Trump's knowledge. But we do not have enough information to draw definitive legal or moral conclusions. Another critical question that deserves examination is why certain aspects of this case have not been pursued more aggressively by law enforcement. The FBI has had access to Epstein's files for years. The Justice Department has conducted investigations, yet no charges have been brought against Trump or many other individuals whose names appear in the files. Why not? There are several possible explanations, and they are not mutually exclusive. One is that the evidence simply is not there. Prosecutors may have reviewed everything available and concluded that while there are suggestive connections and concerning associations, there is not enough admissible evidence to bring charges that would survive a trial. This is a legitimate possibility. Just because we, the public, find certain connections suspicious does not mean they meet the legal standard for prosecution. A second explanation is that prosecuting powerful individuals is extraordinarily difficult. These are people with resources to hire the best lawyers, to fight charges for years, and to attack the credibility of witnesses. Prosecutors generally don't bring cases they don't think they can win, especially against defendants who can afford prolonged legal battles. If the evidence is ambiguous or relies heavily on the testimony of witnesses who might be impeached on cross-examination, prosecutors may decide the case is not strong enough. A third explanation, and one that is widely believed by a large portion of the public, is that there is a cover-up. Polling data shows that major majorities of Americans believe the government is hiding information about Epstein's death and about the people involved in his trafficking network. This belief is not entirely without foundation. Epstein's death in federal custody was ruled a suicide, but it occurred under circumstances that many find suspicious: cameras malfunctioning, guards falling asleep, a high-profile prisoner on suicide watch left unmonitored. Whether or not there was foul play, the optics fueled conspiracy theories. The idea of a cover-up suggests that powerful people, possibly including Trump, possibly including others, have used their influence to suppress evidence or to prevent investigations from proceeding. This is a serious allegation, and it is important to note that we have no direct proof of such a cover-up, but we can also not dismiss it out of hand simply because it sounds conspiratorial. History shows us that cover-ups do happen, especially when powerful individuals have something to lose. The Department of Justice has explicitly warned that some of the materials released to Congress, particularly FBI tip sheets, contain unverified and potentially false information. The DOJ stated that these tips may include fake or falsely submitted images, documents, or videos. This is an important disclaimer because it suggests that not everything in the files should be taken at face value. But it also raises another question. If the DOJ knows some materials false, do they also know which ones are true? And if so, why have they not acted on the true information? One thing is clear from polling data: the public does not trust the government's handling of this case. Large majorities believe information is being hidden. This erosion of trust is itself a significant problem, regardless of whether the distrust is justified. When people lose faith in institutions, it becomes harder to conduct investigations, to get witnesses to come forward, and to ensure that justice is served. Let us now address a crucial concept that is often misunderstood in public discussions of the Epstein files: the difference between absence of evidence and evidence of absence. This distinction is fundamental to understanding what we can and cannot conclude from the documents that have been released. Absence of evidence means that we have not found proof of something. In this case, we have not found proof that Donald Trump committed any crime related to Jeffrey Epstein. There is no smoking gun document, no credible witness testimony, no forensic evidence linking Trump to the sexual abuse of minors. This is a fact. But absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Just because we have not found proof of something does not mean it did not happen. It means we do not have the evidence to prove it, and in the case of the Epstein files, we need to acknowledge that the evidentiary record is incomplete. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell, his longtime associate, was convicted and is serving a prison sentence, but she is not publicly corroborated by naming other individuals. Many potential witnesses have not come forward, and crucially, many documents remain sealed or were never created in the first place. Consider what we do not have access to. We do not have the contents of Epstein's safe, which reportedly contained blackmail material, including photographs and videos. We do not have the full flight logs for all of Epstein's aircraft. We do not have access to Epstein's personal diaries or calendars. We do not have the complete communications between Epstein and his associates. We do not have testimony from all of his victims, some of whom have chosen to remain anonymous or have not been located by investigators. Why does this matter? Because the public discussion often treats the released documents as if they represent the totality of what happened. If Trump's name does not appear in a damning way in the released documents, his supporters claim he is exonerated. But that conclusion is only valid if we assume the released documents contain all the relevant information, and we have no reason to assume that. In fact, we have reasons to suspect the opposite. Documents had been released in stages, often heavily redacted. Some materials were destroyed before investigators could seize them. Epstein's death ended any possibility of his cooperation with investigators. The result is that we are working with a partial record, and we must be intellectually honest about what that means.
This does not mean we should assume guilt where we have no evidence. Presumption of innocence is a bedrock principle, but it does mean we should be cautious about claims of absolute exoneration based on incomplete information. The truth is, we have enough information to know that Trump and Epstein were connected, enough to know that their relationship ended under circumstances that Trump describes as problematic, and enough to know that Epstein himself made claims about Trump's knowledge. But we do not have enough information to draw definitive legal or moral conclusions. Another critical question that deserves examination is why certain aspects of this case have not been pursued more aggressively by law enforcement.
The FBI has had access to Epstein's files for years. The Justice Department has conducted investigations, yet no charges have been brought against Trump or many other individuals whose names appear in the files. Why not? There are several possible explanations, and they are not mutually exclusive. One is that the evidence simply is not there. Prosecutors may have reviewed everything available and concluded that while there are suggestive connections and concerning associations, there is not enough admissible evidence to bring charges that would survive a trial. This is a legitimate possibility. Just because we, the public, find certain connections suspicious does not mean they meet the legal standard for prosecution. A second explanation is that prosecuting powerful individuals is extraordinarily difficult. These are people with resources to hire the best lawyers, to fight charges for years, and to attack the credibility of witnesses. Prosecutors generally do not bring cases they do not think they can win, especially against defendants who can afford prolonged legal battles. If the evidence is ambiguous or relies heavily on the testimony of witnesses who might be impeached on cross-examination, prosecutors may decide the case is not strong enough. A third explanation, and one that is widely believed by a large portion of the public, is that there is a cover-up. Polling data shows that majorities of Americans believe the government is hiding information about Epstein's death and about the people involved in his trafficking network. This belief is not entirely without foundation. Epstein's death in federal custody was ruled a suicide, but it occurred under circumstances that many find suspicious. Cameras malfunctioning, guards falling asleep, a high-profile prisoner on suicide watch left unmonitored. Whether or not there was foul play, the optics fueled conspiracy theories. The idea of a cover-up suggests that powerful people, possibly including Trump, possibly including others, have used their influence to suppress evidence or to prevent investigations from proceeding. This is a serious allegation, and it is important to note that we have no direct proof of such a cover-up. But we also cannot dismiss it out of hand simply because it sounds conspiratorial. History shows us that cover-ups do happen, especially when powerful individuals have something to lose. The Department of Justice has explicitly warned that some of the materials released to Congress, particularly FBI tip sheets, contain unverified and potentially false information. The DOJ stated that these tips may include fake or falsely submitted images, documents, or videos. This is an important disclaimer because it suggests that not everything in the files should be taken at face value. But it also raises another question. If the DOJ knows some materials are false, do they also know which ones are true? And if so, why have they not acted on the true information? One thing is clear from polling data. The public does not trust the government's handling of this case. Large majorities believe information is being hidden. This erosion of trust is itself a significant problem, regardless of whether the distrust is justified. When people lose faith in institutions, it becomes harder to conduct investigations, to get witnesses to come forward, and to ensure that justice is served.
Let us now consider the broader pattern of behavior and the context in which all of this exists. Donald Trump has faced multiple allegations of sexual misconduct over the years, long before his association with Epstein became a public issue. These allegations range from unwanted kissing and groping to more serious claims. Trump has denied all of these allegations, and many have not resulted in legal consequences. However, they do form a pattern of accusations that, at minimum, suggest a complicated history with women and boundaries. We also have Trump's own recorded words. The Access Hollywood tape, in which Trump was recorded bragging about grabbing women without consent, is perhaps the most famous example. Trump's defenders argue that these were just crude locker room comments, not confessions of actual behavior. His critics argue that they reveal a mindset that is consistent with the allegations against him. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Trump's language and behavior, at least historically, has been inappropriate by many people's standards, even if it does not rise to the level of criminal conduct. How does this relate to Epstein? It is important not to conflate different issues. Being accused of sexual harassment is not the same as being involved in child sex trafficking. These are vastly different things, morally, legally, and factually. However, the pattern of allegations and Trump's own statements about women do provide context for why many people are skeptical when he denies any knowledge of Epstein's activities. If Trump has a history of objectifying women and disregarding boundaries, the argument goes, is it really plausible that he would have been oblivious to Epstein's behavior? This is where we must be very careful. It is possible for someone to have a problematic history with women and still not be involved in child trafficking. These are not the same, and we should not assume guilt by character assassination. At the same time, character and credibility do matter when we are evaluating someone's denials. If a person has been credibly accused of misconduct in other contexts, and if their public statements often prove to be false or misleading, then their denials carry less weight than they would if they came from someone with a stronger track record of honesty and respect for boundaries. There is also Trump's 2002 comment about Epstein liking women on the younger side. This comment is often cited as evidence that Trump knew about Epstein's preference for underage girls. But we must be precise. Younger side is vague. It could mean women in their 20s rather than 30s. It could mean teenagers. It could mean something else entirely. Without additional context, we cannot assume Trump was referring to illegal activity. That said, the comment is notable because it shows Trump was aware at some level that Epstein's taste in women skewed younger. Whether Trump understood the implications of that or whether he thought it was merely a preference for legal adults, we do not know. We also need to examine how wealth, power, and political influence shape both the commission of crimes and the investigations that follow. Jeffrey Epstein was able to operate for decades, abusing dozens, if not hundreds, of young women, in part because he was rich and well-connected. He had powerful friends in politics, business, academia, and entertainment. These connections protected him, either actively through intervention or passively through the reluctance of others to investigate or report. This is a systemic problem, not unique to Epstein. History is full of examples of powerful predators who evaded justice for years because their wealth bought them legal protection, their connections bought them silence, and the systems designed to hold people accountable simply do not function the same way for the rich as they do for everyone else. Harvey Weinstein operated openly for decades. Larry Nassar abused gymnasts under the noses of institutions that should have protected them. R. Kelly, his abuse was an open secret in the music industry for years. In each case, power delayed accountability. Donald Trump is one of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world. He has access to top-tier legal representation. He has political influence. He has a media apparatus that amplifies his version of events. If Trump were involved in any way in Epstein's crimes, his ability to avoid consequences would be far greater than that of an ordinary person. This does not mean he is guilty. It means that the absence of charges or legal consequences does not necessarily prove innocence when the person in question has extraordinary resources.
Compare Trump's situation to that of an average person in similar circumstances. If an ordinary citizen were known to have socialized frequently with a convicted sex trafficker, if emails from that trafficker suggested the person had knowledge of criminal activity, if multiple victims had been recruited from the person's place of business, that ordinary citizen would almost certainly face intense scrutiny, search warrants, subpoenas, and possibly charges. The fact that Trump has not faced such consequences could mean the evidence is not there, or it could mean that his position protects him. We cannot know for certain which is true.
This is not an argument for guilt by association or guilt by privilege. It is an argument for clear-eyed acknowledgement of how power functions in our society. When we evaluate claims and counterclaims in cases involving the very wealthy and powerful, we must account for the fact that these individuals play by different rules, whether we like it or not. Let us talk about the death of Jeffrey Epstein, because it is impossible to discuss this case without addressing the elephant in the room. Epstein died in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan in August 2019. His death was ruled a suicide by hanging. However, the circumstances were so unusual that they fueled widespread skepticism and conspiracy theories. Here are the facts that are not in dispute. Epstein was on suicide watch after an earlier incident, but was removed from it shortly before his death. The cameras that should have been recording his cell malfunctioned. The guards who were supposed to be checking on him fell asleep and falsified records. Epstein was one of the highest-profile prisoners in federal custody, with information that could implicate numerous powerful people, yet the security protocols designed to protect such prisoners failed catastrophically. Polling shows that a majority of Americans, including majorities across party lines, do not believe Epstein killed himself. They believe he was murdered to silence him. Others believe he may have been allowed to kill himself, with guards and officials looking the other way. Still others accept the official suicide ruling, but acknowledge that the failures in his supervision were so egregious as to constitute criminal negligence. Why does Epstein's death matter to the Trump question? Because his death ended any possibility of his cooperation with investigators. If Epstein had lived, he might have provided testimony, made plea deals, named names. His death ensured that his knowledge, whatever it was, died with him. This benefits everyone who might have been implicated, Trump included. It does not prove Trump was involved in Epstein's death. That would be pure speculation, but it does mean that a key source of information is permanently unavailable. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate, was convicted of sex trafficking and is currently serving a 20-year prison sentence. She has not cooperated with investigators by providing information about other individuals involved in Epstein's network. Some speculate she is protecting herself or others. Some believe she has nothing to tell because she knows nothing beyond her own involvement. Others believe she has been silenced through threats or promises. We do not know, but the result is the same. Another key witness who could potentially shed light on Trump's involvement or lack thereof has remained silent. The deaths, suicides, and untimely passings of several individuals connected to Epstein have also fueled conspiracy theories. While most of these can be explained as coincidence or have been debunked, the sheer number of people who believe there is more to the story reflects a deep distrust in official narratives. This distrust is not baseless. Governments have lied before. Cover-ups have happened. Powerful people have evaded justice. So, when people say they do not trust the official story, they are not being irrational. They are being historically informed. Now let us address the media narratives and how they shape public perception. This case has become deeply politicized, with different outlets presenting vastly different versions of the story depending on their audience and ideological leanings. Right-leaning media, particularly outlets that are supportive of Trump, have emphasized the lack of direct evidence against him. They point out that no charges have been filed, that victims like Virginia Giuffre have said Trump was not involved, and that emails from Epstein are uncorroborated. They frame the entire issue as a political witch hunt designed to smear Trump by association with Epstein. Some go further and call it the Epstein hoax, a term Trump himself has used, suggesting the whole controversy is fabricated or exaggerated by Democrats and the media. Left-leaning media, on the other hand, have focused heavily on the connections between Trump and Epstein, the concerning content of Epstein's emails, and Trump's past behavior toward women.
They argued that there is enough circumstantial evidence to warrant serious investigation, and that Trump's denials are not credible given his track record. Some outlets have amplified the most sensational aspects of the story, sometimes going beyond what the evidence supports. Social media compounds this problem. Algorithms reward engagement, and few things drive engagement like outrage and scandal. So, on platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook, the most extreme claims, both for and against Trump, get the most visibility. Nuanced analysis gets buried. Fact checks are ignored. The result is a public that is deeply divided, not just on whether Trump is guilty, but on what the basic facts of the case even are. This polarization makes it almost impossible to have a rational public conversation about the issue. If you question the most extreme claims against Trump, you are accused of being a partisan defender. If you point out the concerning connections and unanswered questions, you are accused of spreading conspiracy theories or fake news. The middle ground, where we can acknowledge both the lack of direct evidence and the legitimate reasons for concern, is almost non-existent in the public discourse. We saw this dynamic play out with the TikTok censorship controversy. In early 2026, users noticed that the word Epstein was being blocked in private messages on TikTok. Some believed this was deliberate censorship to protect Trump, especially given that TikTok's U.S. operations had recently come under the control of a Trump-friendly ownership group. California Governor Gavin Newsom even launched an investigation. TikTok claimed it was a technical glitch. We may never know the full truth, but the incident illustrates how quickly any irregularity in this case is interpreted through a partisan lens. The media's role in all of this is complicated. On one hand, journalists have done important work in obtaining documents, interviewing victims, and holding powerful people accountable. On the other hand, the rush to publish, the need to compete for clicks and views, and the ideological biases of different outlets have sometimes resulted in sloppy reporting, misleading headlines, and the amplification of unverified claims. The public deserves better, but the incentives of modern media make it difficult for journalists to provide the careful, nuanced reporting this story requires. So, what can we actually conclude? Let us summarize what we know, what we don't know, and what remains uncertain. We know that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were friends in the 1990s. We know they socialized together, that Trump flew on Epstein's plane, and that Trump described Epstein positively in public statements. This is not in dispute. We know that by the mid-2000s, Trump claims he had a falling out with Epstein and banned him from Mar-a-Lago. We have Trump's word on this, but we don't have contemporaneous documentation of the falling out, which makes it difficult to verify the exact timing or circumstances. We know that Epstein recruited young women from Mar-a-Lago. We know that Trump was aware of this recruitment and says he objected to it. What we don't know is exactly what Trump thought was happening, whether he suspected illegal activity, and if so, whether he reported it. We know that Epstein wrote emails claiming Trump knew about the girls and had spent time with victims. And we know that the victim Epstein specifically named in that email, Virginia Dufresne, has publicly stated Trump was not involved in her abuse. We don't have independent corroboration of Epstein's claims, which means they remain allegations, not proven facts. We know that no criminal charges have been filed against Trump in connection with Epstein. We also know that absence of charges does not necessarily mean absence of wrongdoing, especially when the accused is wealthy and powerful, and when key evidence may be missing or sealed.
We know that a majority of Americans, according to multiple polls, believe Trump either knew about Epstein's crimes or is involved in a cover-up. We also know that public opinion, while important, is not the same as legal proof. What we do not know, and may never know, is the full truth of what Trump knew and when he knew it. We do not know if there are documents, recordings, or witnesses that have not yet come to light. We do not know if investigations are ongoing or have been quietly closed.
We do not know if powerful people have intervened to protect themselves or others. The most intellectually honest conclusion we can reach is this. The available evidence suggests that Trump was closer to Epstein than he now acknowledges, that he likely knew more about Epstein's interest in young women than he admits, and that his explanations for the falling out and his denials of knowledge raise more questions than they answer. However, the available evidence does not prove that Trump participated in Epstein's crimes or that he knowingly facilitated them. The truth likely lies somewhere in a gray area that is uncomfortable for everyone. Trump probably knew something was off about Epstein, probably chose not to inquire too deeply, probably distanced himself when it became socially or legally risky to remain associated, and probably now minimizes the extent of their relationship to avoid political damage. This is not exoneration, but it is also not a conviction. It is an acknowledgement of the limits of what we can know based on the public record. In closing, we must address what this case tells us about power, accountability, and justice in our society. The Jeffrey Epstein case is about more than one man's crimes. It is about a system that allowed those crimes to continue for decades. It is about wealth and connections creating a protective bubble around predators. It is about institutions, from law enforcement to the media to social elites, failing to protect vulnerable people. Donald Trump's connection to this case, whatever its precise nature, is part of that larger story. The same social and economic systems that enabled Epstein to operate are the systems that make it difficult to hold anyone in those circles accountable. Whether Trump is guilty of crimes or merely guilty of poor judgment and selective memory, the fact that we are even asking these questions about a former and potentially future president of the United States should give us pause. We deserve transparency. We deserve complete investigations. We deserve a system where justice is not contingent on wealth or political power. We do not have that system. The Epstein case proves it. And until we confront that reality, cases like this will continue to be mired in suspicion, conspiracy theories, and unresolved questions. The AI verdict, based strictly on the data available, is that Donald Trump's involvement with Jeffrey Epstein is documented at a social level, concerning in its implications, but not proven to be criminal. The questions that remain unanswered are significant. The contradictions in Trump's statements are troubling. The public's skepticism is justified. But we must distinguish between suspicion and proof, between reasonable doubt and unreasonable certainty. This video has asked the difficult questions. Some of them have answers, many do not. That is the reality of this case. It is messy, incomplete, and unsatisfying, but it is the truth as far as we can determine it from the available evidence. Thank you for watching.